I used to work front desk at a hotel that didn't show up on any booking sites. You couldn't find it on Expedia, you couldn't find it on booking.com, no reviews, no photos. This hotel essentially didn't exist, but I worked there. You either knew about it or you didn't. It wasn't anything fancy, it was a mid-range hotel. Guests would come in, and it was usually the same kind of guests here and there, and there was not much talk, not really too much luggage, and they would always check out after one night. They would just hand you an ID, a card, and then they would have one special request, and it was to have a room with a view of the highway. And that was fine until I realized we don't really have any rooms with a view of the highway. They all face inward towards the courtyard. And so I asked my supervisor one time, and I said, what room am I supposed to give them? And he just said, just give them the room number that they request, as if he knew something that I didn't know. Even if that room number didn't exist in the system. That should have been my first sign to quit. But it was good pay, and it was very quiet shifts. One night of 1 a.m. rolled around. It was a man, and he didn't say a word. He just kind of slid his ID towards me in a card, and when I typed his name into the system, nothing came up. He had no reservation, no booking, and before I could even say anything, he requested room 417. The problem is our hotel only had 3 floors, so I told him room 417 doesn't even exist. And he just kind of stared at me and he said, well, it does tonight. So I went into my system, remembering what my boss told me to do, and I printed out a room key for room 417. I don't know how, but the system let me create it, and it printed out just like normal. So I handed him the key card. He took it, and then he kind of paused and he said, okay, don't call my room, no matter what you might hear tonight. And then he left and went up the elevator. I tried not to think much of it until about 3:12 a.m. So the phone started to ring. It was the front desk line, and I looked at the caller ID and it said room 417. And I didn't answer it because of what he told me. And so I just let it stop, and then it wound up ringing again, over and over and over again. So I finally picked up on the 5th ring. I don't know why, I just kind of did. I didn't say anything, and neither did they. It was just like breathing for a minute there. And then a voice came through the phone, and it was higher pitched. It wasn't the man's, and it sounded panicked. Please don't let him come back. The line cut. And then I hear the elevator ding, so I look over. Doors opened. Nobody was inside. The number on the elevator said 5, which did not make any sense to me because we don't have 5 floors. We don't even have 4 floors. As I was looking at that, I started to hear footsteps coming behind me. They sounded like they were coming from behind the desk, and then there's a door, and then there's a hallway that only employees use. And so I could hear them coming through that little hallway. They were slow, and then it stopped when it got to the door. I checked the cameras, empty, nothing was there. Then I heard some knocking, soft, 3 taps, and I just kind of sat there. I didn't move. I held my breath. Then a voice came through the door, and it said, "Why did you answer?" And it was the same voice that I heard over the phone. I ran. I grabbed all of my stuff. I went out the doors. I did not go back to that hotel. I was done with that job. I tried looking up the hotel later on. No listing. It was like it never existed. I could not find it anywhere. However, here's the part that I can't explain. About a month ago, I was driving on the highway, and I began to pass this hotel. I told myself to keep driving, but my curiosity got the best of me, so I pulled into the parking lot and I parked. I was almost wanting to prove to myself that this was normal, so I parked and went on inside. Nobody was at the desk. However, there was a key card printed out, and it was sitting there on the counter, and it said room 417, and then a little note was next to it, and it said, "Welcome back."